y al correr de los años murió. Sin embargo, su padre, el rey, sabía que el alma de la princesa regresaría, quizá en otro cuerpo, en otro tiempo y en otro lugar. Y él la esperaría hasta su último aliento, hasta que el mundo dejara de girar.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically we talk about a movie at least one of us had never seen before. I am your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis. This is episode number 371. And our film this week from 2006 is Pan's Labyrinth. And here to talk with me about it, it's Vic Iddstar Hill. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so Pan's Labyrinth. I reached out to you. I wanted to get you on the show for a little while. Finally got around to it because my undiagnosed adult ADHD. Oh, I should do that. And then, ooh, shiny. And I forget for stretches of time.
The struggle is real.
So when I reached out and I was like, hey, I want to have you on the show. And we started talking about, let's throw some movie ideas around. And this one came up. And I latched on immediately because I love this movie. But what, if any, history do you have with Pan's Labyrinth or Guillermo Del Toro in general?
So I'm a big fan of Guillermo Del Toro's films. And of course, like Name a Woman, now I'm trying to think of them. I can't. The only ones I can think of are the Hellboy movies and, the name's gone. Something about water.
The Shape of Water?
Shape of Water. There we go.
There you go.
Both of which are super fun. Obviously, Hellboy is a different IP, and that's an adaptation, but like Guillermo Del Toro's voice as a director, as a filmmaker, rings through very strongly regardless.
Yes.
And I found this one to be Pan's Labyrinth very much in the same vein as The Shape of Water. Like I would put those two side by side, even despite them being made like however many years apart. And
about 12 years apart, 11 years apart, something like that.
Yeah. And I found those similarities very interesting. But I remember being at college and when this came out, and I'm not a big horror movie person.
Okay.
And in my mind, I just thought it was like, I had no idea what it was. I didn't even know it was Guillermo del Toro at the time. And I just, in my head, wrote it off as like, it's not like a horror movie thing, like The Omen or something in that bracket. And I don't know why it landed in my head in that bracket, because it's obviously nothing like that. And I regret the years I have not spent having watched this movie, because it's really, really good.
So yeah, I am also a big fan of Del Toro. And when this came out in 2006, at that point I had seen Hellboy. I had seen what was the other one right before that? There was Hellboy. There was The Devil's Backbone. I saw that one.
Did he have something to do with Blade 2?
Blade 2, that was the other one.
That was the other one I grew up watching.
So I had seen Blade 2 and Hellboy in theaters, and I had rented and watched The Devil's Backbone based on, I liked those two movies, and this is Del Toro, and Devil's Backbone is very different from either Blade 2 or Hellboy. It's much closer to something like this. And I was immediately taken with those movies and this visual style and this voice that he has. So I see the trailer for Pan's Labyrinth and I'm like, well, I'm there day one. And I go and see this in the theater and did not know going into it that it would be all Spanish language. I knew he was Mexican, so I understood that part of it, but I was not, nothing in the marketing tells you that, because there's no dialogue in any of the trailers that I remember. And I sat down and it started and I was like, oh, cool. All right. And I was just strapped in and my mind was blown. I just left that theater not knowing, because it was such a wonderful, dark fairy tale.
Which is his whole voice.
Yeah. Yep. And if you enjoyed this, I recommend finding The Devil's Backbone and watching it. It's very similar in its tone. It's very similar in its setting. I think at one point I read something about he had planned on doing some kind of a thematic trilogy with Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, and something else, but either that was never actually a thing, or it was sort of a John Carpenter style trilogy of like, I was going to make a third movie that felt the same, because they're not necessarily connected in any way. I don't think many of his movies are, but they also kind of are at the same time, because they all feel like they're in the same sort of universe of like, it's our world, but there's also this fantasy layer, and is it real or is it not? I kind of like the ambiguity of that.
Yeah, that was a standout theme of this, I think.
Now, I do have some friends that I mentioned that I was watching this movie, and they're like, I love that movie. You know, it's great. But they had one criticism of this one in particular and a couple of Del Toro movies. And I want to get your take on this, because I understand it and I kind of agree with it, but also I know where he's coming from. And that is, Guillermo, we get it. The real monsters are the humans. You know, because there is no, the quote unquote subtext of this movie is not subtext. It's just very out in the open. And I think he did the same. He did similar with like The Shape of Water and whatnot. But how do you feel about that in terms of like the balance of sort of the fantastical elements with the real world horror that he does? Because that stuff is hard to watch at times.
Yeah. I wrote a lot of notes while I was watching this movie. I definitely clocked the whole humans are the real monster, or what is the definition of a real monster, and to me that was definitely present, and I don't take issue at all with the fact that that's a consistent theme, because I think it's a theme that humanity could stand to think about a little more often. But for this one as well, whereas something like The Shape of Water very much focused on what it means to be human in a very, very literal way, because you've got a creature that's not a human, and a love story surrounding that. I found this one, the theme of legacy, to be so strong alongside that, like, people are the real monsters, that it kind of balanced it out in a way that was a fresh enough take that it didn't bother me even a bit.
Yeah, it's one of those, I was thinking about it today, and to me, some of it reminds me of like, it's the other side of the coin of a director like, say, a Paul Verhoeven, who does something like RoboCop or Starship Troopers, where it's very obvious he's making a satire of either hyperviolence or fascism or whatever it is, but he does it in such a way that the thing that he's satirizing also looks really cool. And so it can be misinterpreted very easily because the satire is almost too subtle in some ways.
Yeah, that was definitely Starship Troopers in particular, I know, is renowned for that.
Where and this feels like the other side of that coin, which is Del Toro being like, yeah, okay, so I'm gonna have the subtext in here of, you know, of what's going on, but I'm going to make it so blatantly obvious. Like, there is at no point in this movie do you question who the villain is, and it's Captain Vidal. Like, he just is a monster of a human being.
Bad person. And I have a whole section of my notes devoted to him, and I found it really interesting how much more we knew about him than about Ophelia. And how much time we spent with him. And I thought that was fascinating, because obviously he's a terrible person. There's never anything you see from him that is any shred of a redeeming quality, from like the moment we meet him to the moment it's done. But every new piece of information you get is like adding context to the quote unquote lesson of the story. And I think subtext is overrated. I think there's times when you can just be really blatant and it works. And I do think it works here. But I understand if like that subtext is a bit much, like for some viewers, like that's not everybody's taste. But
well, I also think too, like there's a balance to one of the things I love about the Hellboy movies in particular is the fantasy elements of those, especially Hellboy 2. And like there's the marketplace scene.
Yep.
in particular is so much fun because it's just this like it's this fun fantasy world, and this movie has those fantasy elements, but then it balances that out with the real life horrors of the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War, and it's so like seeing the guy's face get sliced open, or so many people. One of my notes is so many people get shot in the face in this movie.
Yes. There's a lot of face horror in Del Toro's work. He
Yes.
really likes to do that a lot. But I would say what sets this apart significantly in my mind from Hellboy, and this is true of everything Del Toro I've seen, is that this fantasy world isn't pretty, and it's got like that kind of grungy,
Yes.
gritty, like if fantasy was actually real, it's like if you've actually picked up and read a proper grim fairy tale, they're not
Right.
like sparkly pixies and things. They're just not. And I feel like there's something very, it makes it feel realer if it's got a little bit of dirt and grime on it, and they're kind of
Yes.
creepy. And like, she sees a giant fucking bug, and the first thing that she says is a fairy.
Yeah.
So like, it's taken as read that this version of this fairy world isn't like per the picture books. But I would say this story goes, and that's true of all of his depictions of it, this story goes like a little bit further as well into like, at no point other than maybe the very, very end, at no point do we see the fairy world in some like nice way. And I got to wondering about halfway through, like, just how bad of a trick the whole thing is. Like, what is she being lured into actually? And that it's not that, oh well, real life is actually better, because it clearly isn't, but rather, is she heading towards something worse because she's so desperate to escape?
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing to think about because the fantasy world, the fairy world is so grimy and grungy, and there was a really cool things they did with like the look of the fawn throughout the movie is constantly evolving as things are getting stronger for him. And so he goes from having like very weathered and a lot of moss growing on him to he's getting smoother and more kind of refined as the movie goes on, but it's always really subtle. It's never there's never a drastic difference between the fawn from one scene to another. I love that. And we're going to talk about the effects at some point for this because holy cow. But I also loved there's the ambiguity of, is this actually happening or is it all in her head? And then an added layer of that ambiguity is what you just brought up, which is like, is this even the right path? Is this the good path for her to go down? Or is this actually going to be worse than reality? And I like the layering of that. And I loved the fact that so many of the things in this movie, fantastical, can be explained away for any character that is not Ophelia.
Yeah.
In a clever way that actually works and is consistent throughout. And I think that's one of my big things with horror and fantasy and sci-fi and all these, genre type films and films in general. Be consistent in your internal logic. Like, as long as you can be consistent internally, I'm going to buy into what you're doing. It doesn't matter to me how outlandish that gets as long as it's consistent throughout the movie.
And also that you don't have to answer that question of if it's real or not.
Right.
Like, you can leave that open to the viewer's interpretation. And I, in fact, like, I wrote a lot of notes about the parallel storylines and how, for the most part, they don't interact. Like, we're watching what's going on with the captain and Mercedes and the resistance fighters in the woods and everything, and that's all parallel to everything, and things are mirrored. So like, Ophelia's first like real failure with the tasks that she's been given coincide with the first real failure of the resistance fighters.
Yep.
Because of the guy getting captured and tortured and ultimately like getting actually tortured to the point of divulging information. And so we're not just invested in whether or not she succeeds at her tasks, we're invested in what's going on in this political environment with this whole community. But the occasions where the two storylines really do interact with each other are very few and far between. And I thought that was really, really interesting and so well done. And obviously the whole of this push for her to want this thing to be true, to want to actually be a princess in the fairy world, is because she's like, okay, well, my real dad's dead, and now I'm being forced to accept this horrid guy as my stepfather, my new father, but I reject him, and now here's an offer of a different father and
Right.
everything that comes with it. And like, she's really not asking many questions at all, which
No.
is born of the desperation of her situation. My ultimate question, which I underlined several times at the end, was if it wasn't for the labyrinth, would she have died in real life?
That's a very good question, because it's hard to say. Like, everything in the movie led to that point, but what would have happened differently had that not been a factor?
Yeah.
And how would it have gone differently? Because she developed a bond with Mercedes.
Yeah.
So what happens there with them?
Like,
it's
Mercedes
very,
came in at the end to save her, and she wasn't there because she was trying to steal her brother to deliver it to the fawn.
yeah.
And if she hadn't been doing that, then she'd have been there to be rescued. And who knows? Who knows? Like, there might have been other factors, because if she also hadn't stolen the baby, the captain wouldn't have followed her into the labyrinth. But I just thought it
Mhm.
was an interesting question that the movie kind of left me with, because I don't know that I believe that it was really happening. I
Yeah,
I
it's
lean on the side of like, this is a girl who is in a horrific situation and is doing whatever it takes. This kid who believes in magic before things even begin. I think she's doing what she has to cope.
yeah, and what I love about it is the fact that you can read it either direction and you're not wrong. And Del Toro
Mm-hmm.
trusts his audience enough to do that. One of the pieces that I read, I thought this was really cool, is audiences have interpreted the ending as everything from a religious metaphor to a psychological allegory. But I like Del Toro saying, I always think about this beautiful quote by, and I'm going to butcher the hell out of this name, but Soren, I'm going to go with Kierkegaard. And he says, the quote is, the tyrant's reign ends with his death, but the martyr's reign starts with his death. And I think that's the essence of this movie. It's about living forever by choosing how you die.
Yeah.
And that is such a Del Toro quote. Like, I can hear it in his voice. I'm picturing him like, there's the Criterion Collection closet videos where they show somebody in the Criterion closet picking out movies and stuff. And his is one of my favorite because but I can just hear him saying that thing right there, and how, like, in the end, Ophelia chose her path and went down that, and it ended the way that it did. Vidal did not. Vidal chose his path, but he didn't choose how he died. And then you brought up legacy, and that is one of the most powerful moments in this, where he's like, tell my son this, and Mercedes cuts him off like, nope, he's not even going to know your name. Like, he's not going to know anything about you.
You don't get that legacy. Everything that he ever did, every decision he ever made was in support of this idea of this legacy he was going to leave. The whole reason that Ophelia and her mother traveled there is because he's like, no, I need my son to be born here where I am, because that's what's right and that's what's powerful and important for my legacy.
Yep.
And the reason he followed her into the labyrinth at the end instead of letting it go, it's not because he was filled with deep love for this baby. It was just because of
that
this
legacy. And
Yeah.
I had several notes about, like, he didn't care at all about Carmen as a person. He didn't see Carmen or Ophelia as people. Carmen was a vessel for his child, his son, to be born, and Ophelia was just collateral damage. She was baggage added on to that. And here was another thing, and I read this, and this is such a cool thing that I never would have known just from watching the movie, which is, in Spanish, when addressing two or more women, you would say bienvenidas. The presence of any male would require the use of bienvenidos. And I'm sure my pronunciation is horrible on that, and I apologize to anybody who speaks Spanish. When Captain Vidal welcomes Ophelia and her pregnant mother, he says bienvenidos, showing that he's most interested in his unborn son.
Damn.
That is a level that it didn't like I didn't clock that watching the movie, but there was so many other things where I'm like, he just doesn't see them as people. And then I read that and I'm like, that's even better. Like that's just adding on to it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I found the depiction of him as a character so good. And like in a horrible way, obviously.
Mhm.
I made notes about the fact that I think it's before he even speaks, you just hear the creak of his uniform, like that tight creaking
Yes.
leather.
Thank you.
And that's so consistent. And you're like, oh my God, before a word is out of his mouth, I know exactly what kind of person he is. And then the first word out of his mouth is that they're late. And like they're late because she's very, very unwell because she's being forced to travel very late in her pregnancy. So like he just doesn't think even a little bit about that. And like the creaking of his uniform that continues through the movie, it's awful because it's like you can tell just how tight and buttoned up the whole thing is, and that's him in a nutshell. And then everything we see thereafter, like the ritual with which he shaves, the ritual of how he like cleans his pocket watch and takes care of it, and he has more reverence for that pocket watch, broken as it is, than he does for any of the other human lives around him.
Yes, and then you learn the story of that pocket watch throughout the movie, that it was his father's and his. I loved that moment, and it. What I love about it is it tells you so much about his character, but the movie doesn't focus on it and dwell on it. It just gives it to you and then moves on, and the movie respects that you will use that information however you need. And I loved that because it's someone else saying, yeah, the men in his unit said he smashed his watch on a rock so that his son would know the exact time he died.
Yeah.
But we learn that after we see him fixing the watch. So that's so great because the scene of him fixing the watch feels like, oh, okay, he is wound super tight, but he also has a reverence for these things and he wants to keep this thing working even though it's broken.
And the fact that he denied knowing about it, let alone having the watch, the fact that he denied the reality that his father likely ever had a watch, is indicative of just how much shame and inferiority he feels and what he feels he has to live up to. So like, it's like that's the why, because otherwise all of these things are happening to Ophelia that she is powerless to have any oversight over. Like her mother brings her to this place. There's war and unrest going on. It's a nationalist, like right-wing regime in the country at this time. Like none of that is in her control, and all of the things that directly affect where she is, disregarding the fairy world stuff, all of that stuff is out of her control. And so this is stuff happening to her and we want to know why, and it's saying, oh, here's why. Like but if you don't care, then it doesn't matter, because like this isn't a good guy. We're not trying to justify his actions, but we're trying to give you enough information so that you can predict as an audience member what's coming.
Yes. Oh, it's such a good script. And this script was nominated for Best Original Screenplay Academy Award for the year that it came out. It didn't win, but it was the only film that was not also nominated for Best Picture to get a nomination for Best Original Screenplay. Now, it would take another, again, 11 years for Del Toro to win for The Shape of Water. But the awards that this was up for, it was worthy of all of them because the writing in this is so good. And what I love too is that Del Toro, he handled the translation for all of the subtitles himself because he didn't trust people to do it properly based on, I think, something else that he had done. Probably, I think it was either Kronos or The Devil's Backbone. He probably didn't like him, but the writing is so exacting throughout this, and I think that's what really carries it. Is it can look great, and the cinematography was outstanding. I loved the use of color. I kept clocking so many times how you would have when she's in the fairy world. There's a lot of different color temperatures and the differences in the warm tones and the dark tones, and a lot of everything was kind of basing off of green, and then just sort of like degrees off of that in one direction or the other, depending on the scene and how they wanted to play that out. And I loved it. I absolutely loved all of that.
Yeah, I got several notes about the coloring because I thought it was masterful, and not just the coloring, but like, uh, there's like I saw in the sort of like motion of the scenes, particularly stood out when Mercedes is going to meet her brother and the others in the woods,
Mhm.
and it's like it's gorgeous, it's sunlit. There's like shafts of light through the trees, and there's
Yep.
trickling water, and there's like dust motes or midges or whatever they are, like moving through the air, and it's beautiful. And to me it's like, oh, look at this, it's alive and it's real and everything's full of color and there's motion to it in a way that doesn't exist either in at the mill where the captain's sort of stronghold is, or in the fairy world. And then you cut right back to the captain's world where everything is brown and everything is mud and
Mhm.
everything has been trodden into, like, all the grass has been trodden to mud, and everything is very static, or it's a deluge of rain, which
Yes.
is oppressive and it's like beating down on. And I know that that was a very intentional choice, I assume, because the background of several shots you could see the sunlight where it was actually a sunny day, and they were doing like day for night shooting or things like
Yep.
that. You can see like the harshness of the shadows, so it was something they very specifically were going for, was that downpour. And even in the fairy world, everything is static and still, and the colors, the dinner table with the
Oh,
eye
with the
guy.
Pale Man, yeah.
Yeah, this iconic monster from this movie, I think, is
Yes.
one of the standout ones. And everything on that table is red
Mm-hmm.
because this guy, for all being an incredibly pale fella himself, I don't know why I've gendered him male. Sorry.
Well, he is listed as the Pale Man.
Okay,
So
well then I feel justified. But everything on that table is red. Like, there's
yeah,
red fruits, and even the things that aren't actually red are so deep orange and umber that they take on a red tone, and so it just feels like a table of blood.
yeah,
And then, like, he starts like biting the heads off of fairies, and he is covered in the blood, and you're like, oh, that's
yeah.
deeply uncomfortable.
Well, and they did really cool stuff with set decoration and backgrounds where everything in the reality is very straight and 90-degree angles, and
Hmm.
then the further we get into the fairy world, it's a lot of circular things to frame,
Yes.
especially to frame Ophelia, to give us these visual cues that it's different without, again, it doesn't have to signpost any of that. It just sort of is that.
Yeah.
And there's that ambiguity of, is it real or is it not? But then there's also the things like the chalk outline for the door,
Mm.
which, number one, I love the idea of the chalk outline. Now, Ophelia, girl, if you're going to draw a door, draw one a little bigger. All
Yeah.
right? You can go a little bigger than that. It's fine. But I love her watching the chalk dissolve the stone at one point
Mhm.
before opening the door. That was wonderful. But did that really work, or is that all in her head? Because
I
no one else
mean,
sees it, but we
when
do.
when Mercedes and the others burst into the room at the end to save her, you can see a chalk outline on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we saw Ophelia go through those doors that she created earlier, once they closed, the chalk outline disappeared.
That's a good
So
point.
that is what tells me it wasn't real.
That is a very good point.
But she did get to the captain's room.
She did.
So
Yeah.
who knows?
And I like that we don't see her draw a door for that or go through a door into that room. She just appears in that room.
Yeah.
She's just in there. Again, it's very clever and very smart writing the way they did all of this different stuff.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. Now, kind of piggybacking on the set design and the art direction of the movie, which is gorgeous throughout. Even the dirty, muddy stuff, there's a beauty to it. But the fantasy elements of this, and especially the makeup work and the monsters, are
So good.
unreal. I touched on the faun. Doug Jones plays the faun.
Of course he does.
Because of course, A, of course he does. B, he is just, Del Toro needs somebody in a suit. Call up Doug. Get him in
Yeah.
here. He plays the faun. I love the faun's legs. And the way they did it
Mm.
was clever, because what they had was prosthetics on his legs. And the prosthetics were the way that the knee or the ankle joint would come out in that. I can't remember how you what the wording is for it, but the way like a dog's legs are.
Mm-hmm.
But his legs stuck through there so he could just walk around like normal, and they had like green screen tights on.
Yeah.
And so Doug Jones is in that costume and he's able to articulate the legs with how he walks. And then they just paint those out later. They would shoot clean plates and go through and paint it out. But he's also got like this practical helmet mask thing with the ears and everything. That fawn, the whole design of it was great. And apparently it was in enough multiple pieces that he said it's one of the most comfortable suits he's worn.
Oh, nice.
Because he
yeah.
had a lot of range of motion because it wasn't one solid piece. It would be like the head and then the chest and then the legs, and the legs anchored on his hips instead of on his shoulders and all sorts of stuff like that. So
yeah, it's one of my favorite things about Del Toro's like fantasy creatures is how practical the effects are, how real and sort of visceral they are, but also in a way where they feel old like the earth.
yes,
Like they are born of stone, as opposed to a very like squishy organic what am I trying to say? Like a fantastical feeling thing. Like he's not afraid in the designs for the creatures to have like carvings in their faces that denote their sort of fey origins and such. And there's like symbols and things actually in those creatures, and that's very prevalent as well in like the Hellboy movies in particular jumps to mind. And I really like that because it makes it feel like these creatures just climbed right out of the wall, you know.
Yeah.
And they feel, these are creatures that live down in dark, dank spaces a lot of the time, and they look and feel as kind of anemic and as fleshy, or flip side, as like leathery as they would in that sort of way. And I don't think that's something you can achieve with CGI. And so I love all the practical effects and the suits and prosthetics and everything. It's just phenomenal.
It's such a good mix of practical on-set effects and then visual effects to clean it up or to add to it or to make it more. Like the fawn is one, right, where the legs are practical and digital effect, and done really well. But then the suit is a practical thing, and maybe they tweak it here and there. But also, like, you've got Doug Jones in there, and there's a tactile nature to that. And credit to Doug Jones for not only being able to act in that, he learned all of his lines for this movie in Spanish, a language he did not speak.
I was going to say.
And he learned all of Ophelia's lines for this movie so that he would know the timing and when to react, because part of that helmet that he had to wear was it was very loud in there, so he couldn't always hear her when they were on set.
Yeah.
So he learned all of that in Spanish, and then the kind of cherry on top of that sundae is they didn't use his voice. They ended up dubbing in a different voice for all of the Fawn's lines. But because he had done all of the dialogue, they had the mouth movements were already there. And his reactions to Ophelia were already there. So his performance comes through even if it's not his voice. And I think at the end of the day, while replacing his voice in the first Hellboy for Abe Sapien with David Hyde Pierce, I was glad that in the sequel they let Doug Jones be the voice of Abe because he does so much for it. I think here, because of the language barrier, it was probably the better choice. But just a credit to him for learning all of that, and the performance he gives is outstanding. I love the Fawn because, just like everything else, it's that ambiguous nature. He's both kind and gentle and demonstrative and angry.
Yeah, the Fawn I found deeply unsettling.
Yes.
And like in my notes, I have a whole section of notes for the Fawn. My first note is hard to trust the Fawn, and my last note is the Fawn is actually all right. But that he's suspect in just the right kind of way, which is that like we as adults watching this wouldn't trust him as far as we could throw him, and but for Ophelia, for a little girl desperate to escape her reality, who isn't afraid of giant bugs and thinks that they're fairies, and who will run into a labyrinth and down like a stone mysterious pit without a backward glance, that's perfectly acceptable. He's just like completely fine because like compared to the rest of her reality, this is a dream.
Right.
This is lovely. So it's like we can see the tells that are there that would make us not trust him, and she can't, and we can see that she can't. So you're just like, I hope this isn't gonna backfire, because we're just along for the ride. And she's like, yeah, there's I found this is off the back of that, like her as a character as well was so brilliantly done and brilliantly performed, that like the things that she did and the actions she took and the reactions she had were so apropos of an actual little girl in that environment.
Yes.
It felt very, very real. Like she was told explicitly, don't eat the food, and you know she's going to eat the food. And then she does. And then you're like, okay, but I kind of get it, because this is at a time where there was significant food scarcity.
Yep.
So she's legitimately starving. And she also went to bed without supper that night because she got her dress all muddy in the woods. So she really, really needs the food. And she was like, a couple of grapes. No one's going to miss a couple of grapes. I already got the thing that I needed to get from here. Who's going to miss a couple of grapes?
Exactly. Yep. It was this thing of courageous disobedience was the term I read. And I love that because it would be very easy to read that scene as a character in a horror movie making a dumb mistake because they just don't have like self-preservation. No. But it's not that. Number one, child, you brought up the food scarcity, right? Going to bed without dinner. But also that courageous disobedience, which sets up for her at the end, not doing what the fawn tells her to do after saying, I'll do whatever, you know, when with the fawn telling her, like, you will do whatever I say, you know, promise me that. And then she shows up and then says no. And that was the correct answer. Yeah. Was to not do that thing. But it's also like set on the backdrop of the Spain at that time, where like going against the government was a bad idea.
I mean, the doctor said it explicitly to the captain when he killed the one guy who'd been tortured, and the captain had ordered him not to, and he's like, well, why did you not just obey my order? And he was like, I am not like you. I cannot just obey an order for order's sake. Mm-hmm. I'm not that kind of person. And then we see him die immediately after that. Like, he knows he has chosen his own death because he is not obeying what has been given to him as an instruction. So that's the blueprint for how it's going to end. Like, we know exactly how that ends, which is the disobedience of an instruction, albeit the right thing to do, leads immediately to your death.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does it for both the doctor and for Ophelia.
Yeah.
And then I love the ending with Ophelia getting that release into the fantasy world. Mm-hmm. Because again, you could just as easily read it as it is her soul going back home, as much as it is just a way for her to escape the horrors of the world that she's in.
Yeah.
Both are perfectly valid, and I love that ending. I don't know how the king and queen get up on those thrones or down.
I was ready for the next shot where she's like climbing up and like making her way up there.
So the fawn is the centerpiece of this, but the other iconic monster, you mentioned him already, but the Pale Man, also, by the way, played by Doug Jones. He did double duty in this movie because, again, need somebody in a suit. You can't see his face. Call up Doug.
Yeah.
The Pale Man is such a grotesque and frightening creature.
Awful.
And it made even more so if you really pay attention to the background imagery inside that room. Mm-hmm. Because you walk into that room, she walks in there, and it's just this opulent feast. And this thing sitting at the end of it. And then you realize that, like, they show some quick flashes of the images. on the wall, and it's like the pale man eating children,
Mm-hmm.
and then the pile of shoes, and you're like, this gets worse the more they show.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very, and again, like a bit of a tangent, but like, I don't know if it was intentional or if this is just the connection that I made in my mind, but that big pile of shoes and the connection of the visuals of the piles of shoes, if you think of like Auschwitz
Mm-hmm.
and piles of shoes, piles of spectacles of all of the victims of that place. And it really kind of ran true as like a consistent Nazi Germany, nationalist far right regime at that time was obviously prevalent despite the neutrality at that point from Spain. I think it was leaning a little bit more in that direction, I think on purpose, than the actual sort of read of Spanish military forces at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Like cut from the same cloth, they were certainly, but it seemed that much more intentional in this film.
Yeah. No, I totally get that.
Yeah, just difficult to watch, you know?
It really was. And like the whole scene with the pale man is so rough because it is the classic tension scene. Because like as soon as she walks into that room, if you're coming into this blind, tell me, you watch that, you see him at the end of the table and you're like, something's happening with that dude. And I don't like whatever it's going to be. And now you spend the whole scene waiting for it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just stone still. Now, I will say they did use just a dummy for the scenes where the character didn't move, so Doug Jones didn't have to sit in that costume motionless, thankfully. But that whole time, you're just waiting, like, what is going to be the thing that sets that off, right? Like, is it going to be the key in the lock? Is it going to be taking whatever's out of there? Like, you don't know what it is, and so you just keep waiting for it. And they keep showing these pictures, and I did read that one of the inspirations for it was was Saturn eating his children painting, which I see completely.
Yeah, I see it now.
And also the pale man being like the skins, the saggy skin, like
God.
it's this idea that the pale man was this giant, round, fat creature that was just feasting on things, and now he's been stuck here for who knows how long. Who knows how long that food's been there, and he's been motionless, and this just like lost a ton of weight in this saggy skin now, which is just even worse.
His legs were so upsetting.
Yes.
I didn't like that at all.
No, I did not. That was one of the few times where, so they did prosthetics for the upper body.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the lower body, they did kind of a combination of CG and sort of puppetry. Like, what is there's a Japanese style of puppetry where they almost have like armatures, and is it bunraku?
I don't know that I know the name.
I can't remember it, but there's something where it's like a puppet sort of in front of a person, basically, is what they used for the legs, and then did a bunch of digital, because straight on they could kind of get away with it, but any of the profile shots they had to really do digital to get those legs, because those legs were super upsetting. Like it's this big round saggy stomach and arms, and then these just twigs for legs, and the way he moved was so
yeah, it was so unsettling. It's a classic like Doug Jones performance of the removal of humanity through the motion of the body. I listened to a fantastic interview with Doug Jones several years ago. I think it was the Buffering the Vampire Slayer podcast, where they interviewed him about a whole bunch of his work and how he had gone to like mime school specifically to learn that craft, and it was fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. Like mimes always get, a bad rap, and they're the butt of a lot of jokes, but mime work is incredible. There's a wonderful musical group, the Steam Powered Giraffe. And they all met in mime school. A lot of them did in, I think, San Francisco. And there's a mime aspect to a lot of what they do, because the whole shtick with that group is that they are automatons. And so they move like steampunk automatons.
That's really fun.
And it's great. But like people that study mime and do that, and the movement of that kind of stuff, Doug Jones and the like.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to me because it's a thing that I am no good at, but I try. Like I have tried to do physical acting before. That's always been my joke. Back when I was doing, my friends and I did sketch comedy for a little while on a public access channel. And my joke about myself was always give me the roles that don't have any dialogue because my acting will be better if I don't have to speak. So, I would end up being the one in a mask, doing the Jason Voorhees type thing. Like, I'm good at that. But real mime, like you watch, characters, actors learning to move like apes for Planet of the Apes, right? Whether it's motion capture or in suits. That kind of stuff just fascinates me because there's so much to it that you pick up on subconsciously.
I think it's like as well when you're looking at creatures that don't exist in real life. So it's not about learning the behaviors and motions or that make up that creature's movements, understanding their anatomy and where they put their body weight and how they move and how the joints articulate. You're inventing something new and being intentional about the type of movement and how it makes you feel, instead of not just being quote unquote realistic to whatever the creature is, but like what emotion can you evoke? And I feel like if you study human motion enough, then you can identify what the hallmarks of actual real human movement are, and then you can consciously remove them from your performance. And that's unsettling in a way, like you don't know that you're noticing it, but you feel it,
It's movement uncanny valley.
Yes.
Right? Like, because it's the pale man is humanoid, but he's not human. And he doesn't move or act like a human would, but he also has he has 2 legs and 2 arms and a torso, so he looks somewhat humanish, which makes it even worse.
Yeah.
And then you add to it like the eyes sitting on a plate.
It's like the first thing he does, he wakes up and he's like, where are my eyes? And it's just horrifying. Just absolutely nightmare fuel.
That image of the hands spreading out and the eyes in the middle of it is so good. And then I also read that Doug Jones had to look through the nostrils in the mask, but he had to look cross-eyed. Like he's like, I could see out the left nostril with my right eye and the right nostril with my left eye. And that's how he had to move around in that thing.
The world doesn't deserve Doug Jones.
We do not. We do not deserve Doug Jones at all. And by all accounts, he is just a lovely human being too. But it's a masterful performance. And for me, one of the great things is acting. There are so many different forms of acting, right? And you have in this, the Ophelia, played by Ivana Baquero, like 11 years old, just so young. And she was actually, the character was originally, I guess, written to be like 8 or 9 years old. And then she gave her audition, and Del Toro liked it enough that he tweaked the script to make her a little bit older. She's fantastic throughout. And everyone in this is like, and I was trying to think of if I knew them from anything else, and I really don't. It's kind of this movie, and then a couple of them have popped up. Like Ivana popped up in a couple of movies here and there that I've seen, but I couldn't pick her out of a lineup, quite honestly. Doug Jones, I don't see his face, but it's Doug Jones. Like,
yeah. I feel like I knew Mercedes from somewhere else, and I did not remember to look it up. But
I did too, and you know what it was? Is there was several actors in this movie that I kept writing my notes down as like Spanish so-and-so, right? So the doctor, there was a couple of shots. He reminded me of Richard Schiff. If you've seen like West Wing or any number of movies. If you know who Richard Schiff is, he kind of reminded me of Spanish Richard Schiff. He had a very similar beard. The glasses made him look that way. Pedro, Mercedes' brother. I think my note on him was, if I could find it. Of course, I didn't highlight it, but it was there was somebody. But Mercedes, same thing. I kept thinking I've seen her in something, and I may have. Like I think I looked at her IMDb, and she played like a Nora. In the Flash movie from a couple of years ago, which wasn't very good, but she was in that as it. You don't
I
really
didn't
need
make
to.
time for that one.
No, you're fine. But she also reminds me a bit of Rebecca Hall, who was in like Iron Man 3 as Maya
Oh,
Hansen.
yes.
Which
I
as soon
see what
as
you're
as soon as I
saying
made that
there.
connection, I'm like, that's why she looks so familiar. Like I've seen her in
Yeah.
a couple of things, but she makes me think of Rebecca Hall.
I can see the similarity for sure.
And if I can figure out who it was that Pedro reminded me of, I will mention it. But like everybody in this, and apparently Sergey Lopez as Vidal was not known as a serious actor. Like he was known more for comedies prior to this, is
Oh,
what I read. And that
interesting
producers,
choice.
because this was one of those like trivia things where the producers were telling Del Toro, this guy's not really like he's not going to be able to carry this movie, the weight of this movie. And he's like, I don't care about that. I think he's perfect. And he just knocks it out of the park. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely hate him from the moment he's on screen.
Yeah. I have so many notes about the captain. It's ridiculous. And it's because we got to know him so much, and we got probably one of the biggest insights into what made him tick and how that showed through his actions. I found it really interesting that he had such a death wish, like because it's like he was waiting the whole time for his moment that was going to be the moment. And that's, when there was actual gunfire and things, and he's just like casually walking through the middle of active combat and taking his time, and he has no fear about it. So he's lacking that critical fear of death that is a motivator to make better choices sometimes for your well-being.
Right.
And that's obviously evident even at the end when he walks out and he sees that they're all standing outside the labyrinth waiting for him, and he's like, okay, this is it. And he doesn't look scared, he doesn't look worried or anything. He's just like, okay, here we go. And I'm like, wow, dude, is this what your whole life is about? And if you remove any want for anything else from a life than to die the right way and set up the desired legacy that you feel that is important to set up, then what is left as a person, as a human being? And like, no wonder he's capable of these terrible, terrible things that are all contributing toward this end that he thinks is what life is all about. Like, that's what he thinks life is all about, is the legacy you leave behind, and that legacy is determined by what a badass and like heartless, stone cold person you are.
And it was like him continuing his father's legacy of being a good soldier by disregarding anything other than his military record, basically.
Yeah.
And ignoring anything else. And then to have all that taken away from him at the very end is just so poetic and so perfect.
Yeah.
I did find out, by the way, Pedro, my note was Pedro looks a bit like Spanish Joseph Quinn. Eddie Munson from Stranger Things.
Right, yeah.
Like I was getting that feeling watching it this time.
I can see
like,
it.
Yeah, I can see a little bit of that there. Vidal just as a character is so intriguing to me because there's so much there, and yet all of it is bad. Yeah. Right up to the fact that, like, at the very end of the movie, he tracks this little girl, into a labyrinth, finds her, gets his child from her, and then shoots the little girl. Yeah. Without question, without hesitation, cold-blooded, right there. I'm just like, he's already a monster, and you're just making him more of a monster. It's why my friend is like, yeah, okay, Guillermo, we get it. Humans are the real monsters. You can be a little more subtle with it, but I understand it. Like, I understand that criticism, but I understand where Del Toro's coming from and why he does it the way that he does. And it makes it very easy to root against Vidal throughout the movie because he's just terrible.
Yeah. And every piece, like we were saying earlier, every new piece of information we get about him is about explaining the why around the events that are happening, not with any attempt to humanize him or make him sympathetic. Like, there's nothing sympathetic about him. It's just like being given all of the pieces of the puzzle to explain what is about to unfold and why it will unfold that way.
Yes. And I appreciate the movie not trying to make him sympathetic either. Because we don't always need that. There are people that are just unsympathetic monsters, and he is one of them.
Yeah. There's a I can't remember her name. There's a YouTuber who talks about story and talks about the nature of evil, and there's been this move towards sympathizing villains in fiction to make them more realistic. And in the course of that, it's to sympathize them, and that's why we have like this era of people really liking the bad guy and rooting kind of for the bad guy.
Sure.
A little bit like we love our Disney villains, you know, that kind of thing. They have these qualities that are endearing even if their actions within the narrative are still bad. And I think this is a great example of not doing that, but providing enough context that we understand exactly why he's behaving the way he is, but we can all say with confidence that we wouldn't respond that way. We wouldn't do that. And it's every single, there's not a second wasted. Every single moment of every single scene he is in is there to reinforce what a terrible fucking person he is. Sorry, I'm swearing again.
No. But it's true. And also this being, because this is a fairy tale. At the end of the day, this movie is a fairy tale. And in fairy tales, you have very clear heroes and villains. And to have a very clear villain, I think is important, because it's why, for instance, to go back into horror, the first Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978, is probably my favorite slasher film of all time, because they don't try to humanize the killer, and there's no reason given for what he's doing. He just picked somebody at random and decided that that was his target at that moment, and he imprinted on them, and there we go, and that's it. Rob Zombie, when he remade Halloween, tried to dive into the psychology of what made Michael Myers into the crazy killer, and that took all of the teeth out of it for me, because it took all of the mystery out. I don't need 45 minutes of backstory as to how Michael Myers became this. It's just, he's evil, he's crazy, and he stalks people and stabs them. That's all I need, and that's perfect. And in here, like, I don't need Vidal to have any kind of sympathy. Like, they could have very easily made something about, you know, the way his father gave the message to him by smashing the watch and being like, this is how a brave man dies.
Yeah.
And for him to just throw that out and just be like, nope, he didn't even have a watch. I don't know what you're talking about. As he's got this broken watch that we know now the story, and he's denying that. Like, it just hammers home and cements even more about how terrible he is.
Every opportunity he has that could be that sympathizing, humanizing moment, he like cranks it up to 11 on the asshole scale. Like, even like hosting a big fancy dinner during a significant food scarcity, and they're all passing around like the ration booklet saying like, we're going to cut down on people's rations anyway, here's the duck, and they just pass it over. Like, it's insane.
It just further, like, it cements the haves and have-nots, right? The cultural, socioeconomic divides.
Yes.
And even to the point, like, we know they have enough rations and supplies. He's got a whole barn full of them, but he is limiting how much people can have, and he's doing it because they might give something to the resistance people. He doesn't even know if any of them are, but rather than giving them anyone that opportunity, he'll just make all of the poor people suffer. All of the common folks suffer, while the rich ones live opulently and eat whatever they want and are fine.
And it's fueled additionally by this, like, that kind of eugenics mindset of, like, we're better than you are. Like, he genuinely sees people as being inferior. And I thought that was an interesting point that they made as well with the origin of how he met Ophelia's mother. Because, you know, Ophelia's father was his tailor, and then when he died, she had to take over the work. The power imbalance there right from the get-go, like, this is a military man, a position of status to begin with. He's in charge of everybody, so he's like top dog, and that power he has over everybody. And then his own wife was a tradesperson who served him, and she continues to just serve him, and that is her whole function. And I'm sure he doesn't see it any different between her tailoring his suits versus birthing his child. Like, these are the same, they're
Yep.
on par with each other, you know.
Yeah.
And he can just not see people as people. Like, he had no hesitation whatsoever when he smashed that poor like rabbit hunter's son in the face and like beat him to death without even blinking, because he doesn't see them as people.
And again, it comes back to Del Toro's strength in the script and then the direction of the scene, where the first thing we see with him is like, oh, she's 15 minutes late. So we already don't like him. But then this idea that, oh, they caught some people, they might be part of the resistance. He's looking through the bag, he's seeing like random stuff. The guy is trying to be like, look, my dad's just out hunting rabbits. He finds the bottle of liquor, wine, whatever it was, and then beats the dude's face in with it in a scene that is tough to watch. And we're just locked in to this. Like, the movie's like, you're going to watch this or you're going to cover your eyes, and we're going to show you all of it. And then to have it end with they found the rabbit in the bag and him giving crap to his soldiers and being like, search them better next time. Yeah. No regard whatsoever for the two people he just killed, because they're not humans to him.
No, it's more like just like it was an inconvenience for him. It wasted his time.
That's like, a perfect way to put it.
They weren't worthy of his time because there was no victory in killing them, because they weren't actually resistance fighters. They were just people.
Yeah.
And inferior people at that. And I feel like in a similar way, I made a note about when he was stitching up his own lip. Mm. I put in all caps, not the self-lip stitch, because it's so indicative of he's going to do it himself. Mm-hmm. You know, he's going to stand at his mirror where he shaves, and he's going to do this himself, not least because he's already killed the doctor.
Which, I love the delicious irony of he kills the doctor, and then immediately someone tells him, your wife is dying.
Yeah, your son's going to die.
And your son's going to die. And he's like, get the paramedical or whatever, you know, the troop medic. Like, that's the best he's got. And he's going to tell that guy the same thing he told the doctor, which is like, you do whatever you have to save the boy.
Yep.
Because he doesn't care about his wife at all. She is just a vehicle for his child to be born, which all of that makes the scene where Mercedes is captured. And we've seen twice where she's hiding the knife in her apron, which is great because it's very obvious, but we saw it once, we saw it twice. And so now our brains are like, oh, she's got that. So when she pulls that out of her apron, it's like, yes, we've seen that. We know. Mm-hmm. And now you're just waiting for it. And I love the way that mirrors the scene where he was torturing the stuttering guy.
Yeah.
Because you can tell.
Know the speech he's going to give. And
yes. It's so brilliant to do that because he's literally just said his weakness is pride seconds earlier. And now we're seeing that manifest itself because he's going through the exact bullet points word for word that he said to the last person, because he knows, like, I've got her tied up and it's just a woman and blah blah blah. And my one question was, we got the cheek slice, sure, but what about both his shoulders?
Yeah,
because he got stabbed in both of those pretty good.
I'm pretty sure he got like stabbed in the lung at least once, and he seems to be fine. But it wasn't a very big knife, to be fair.
That's true.
Maybe it's like, he's a big guy. Maybe it went through. Like, I mean, like, if nothing else, those shirts are thick and the layers. But he seemed fine after the stabbing. It was really just the face slice, which was to watch even.
It's so rough, but it's also so cathartic.
It is. Like, good for you, girl. And I think, like, that's another theme of this film, I suppose, is like, what it means to have power as well.
Oh, yeah.
And where the power lives. And like, he has all the power for the majority of this film. And I think the fawn has some of that power as well. And maybe that's why I found the fawn difficult to trust at times,
Mhm.
was because I was becoming very naturally distrusting of anyone who had that power over other people who were in positions of weakness or perceived positions of weakness, and what the reason for that perceived weakness is. Like, because even the fawn, who was like, your highness, you're the princess, you know, your royalty, that the fawn was still telling her what to do and saying, you have to obey my orders and follow these instructions. And then he comes to check up on her like, well, why haven't you done it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that it becomes indicative still of that power, and that ultimately Ophelia had a power over the fawn by just simply refusing to offer up her brother,
Mhm.
even though that wasn't a power she had over the captain. Like, she had a way to exert a power over one of these potentially sort of oppressive forces in her life, and she had been so powerless up till that point. Like, even the actions she was taking to pass these tasks, these tests, she was still just doing as she was told,
Yeah.
to a greater or lesser extent obediently. And then at the end is like the first time where she says explicitly, no, this is my choice, this is what I'm doing, I am taking back the power of this decision in this moment. I won't be cajoled into doing something that I firmly do not believe with. I'm not going to spill the blood of my innocent baby brother.
Yeah.
um
Well, and
yeah
I love too how like she's told, oh, it has to be the blood of an innocent to open the gate, and then she says no, the baby's taken away, but then it's her blood
hmm
that we see drop down, and that opens the gate. And again, it's that whole thing of like, do you read it as it's really happening to her, or is it all just kind of in her mind? Because it all works out pretty well for her at the end in terms of like, oh, the thing you did, like Ophelia dies, but her soul moves on, right? She gets this closure of going to the fairy world in her mind in death. It's that whole idea, and like, no, what you actually did was the right thing. You passed the test, right?
yeah
And so, do you read that as she actually did, or is that just her mind creating that to
yeah
justify all the actions? It's wonderful in that way.
It gives her peace regardless.
Yes.
And at the end of it, it's not just that the captain dies, it's that the power of that he holds, because there's a way for people's power to remain after they die even.
Hmm.
um he has absolutely no hold over anybody else after he's dead, and that is because of Mercedes saying actually no. And I think that is, you said earlier, it's so cathartic. It's
Oh,
yeah
absolutely wonderful. I also loved the design of, kind of getting back to some of the special effects, the design of the fairy that we meet initially, because it's this kind of amalgamation of sort of stick bugs.
mm-hmm
And then when she's like, but this is what a fairy looks like, and it morphs into that. But again, this kind of funhouse mirror version of it, where
yeah
it is that, but not quite that. I really enjoyed. They did, however, make this noise a few times. Chittering noises like that just make my skin crawl.
Ooh, I
It's
did make a note. The chittering noises are so upsetting. But when Ophelia's mother has died and she's collecting her stuff from the room, and she like looks back toward the window where her mother's wheelchair is,
Mhm.
and for a brief moment you hear this like flapping sort of sound, and you're like, oh, the fairy. And
Yeah.
then some like crows or ravens or something fly past the window, and you realize that's what it was. And I realized how much I had been programmed to like the sound, even as creepy as it was. Like when the thing first appeared at the beginning, I was like,
Oh
because it's
yeah.
just a giant bug really close to her, and it's got big legs and it skitches and it flutters. But like, I was so hoping that sound meant that the fairies were coming back to her to give her another shot. And they did ultimately, but in that moment I remember being like, oh, and it's a deliberate misdirect that showed me that I had been brought round to the fairies.
And it's the way, because this definitely is not the first movie to give us kind of a more faithful version of what fairy tales were, right? And the darkness of fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like this was a movie that really brought it into a mainstream and in front of a lot of audiences to show the dark side of fairy tales that we had lost for so many years with the Disneyfication of a lot of fairy tales.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I love Disney movies. They have their place, but there is a thing with fairy tales that is dark and scary, and I like seeing that in a movie. Cautionary.
Yes.
Now, I love the visuals in this movie, the makeup work, the creature effects, the cinematography, but the sound. We've touched on it a few times, but the sound work and the score are so good. I am so glad you mentioned and you brought up the sound of like the leather on the uniforms, because one of my first notes was like, man, that is just, it tells you so much right away with just the creaking, crunchy sound of that leather.
Yeah.
And all throughout, there's another moment that for me was absolutely phenomenal sound-wise, and it is Mercedes and Ophelia leaving. When they leave and then they get caught. But they're walking outside, and we're hearing it's just this deluge of rain.
Oh, yeah.
And she opens the umbrella, and the sound change of the rain hitting the umbrella as they walk out, it gave me chills this time watching it.
I was so anxious for them. I was like, that's a noisy umbrella. Put it down. Just run through the rain.
Yeah.
You know? Get wet. It's fine. Just
and the framing of all of that was so good, because we're hearing all this noise, and then she's holding the umbrella so it obscures all the background, and she turns like, I heard something. And you're just sitting there like, oh boy, no, it's not going to end well. And like, even knowing what's coming, I'm still edge of my seat waiting for it. And there's that reveal, and there's not only the captain, but all the soldiers.
Everybody. Everybody's there.
So this did win some Academy Awards, by the way. It won.
Good.
It was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, but it won Best Cinematography, and it deserved that, because just the way everything was shot, and the lighting, and not only the colors, but also the light and shadow of everything, and how dark things were, but you could still see what was going on, was just brilliant. So I have to mention Guillermo Navarro was the cinematographer, and he won Best Cinematography. And then it won Art Direction. Again, very deserving. The art direction in this is phenomenal. And it also won for the makeup. And absolutely deserved all of that. I was sad that it didn't get any sound nominations, because, man, watching it this time, I realized how good the sound was. And I loved the use of score and how it's all built around that lullaby.
Yes. Like, even when you don't think you're hearing it or don't realize you're hearing it, you are, and it's connecting you with all the sort of through line of the scenes where it shows up.
And then where they would strategically pull it out and not have score in certain scenes. So all you heard was the leather of gloves and the sounds, the diegetic sounds within the scene with no music. So you're, again, this movie puts you into situations, uncomfortable ones, and then holds you there and makes you watch it, whether it's Vidal getting his face sliced or stitching himself back up. My note on that was like, no, I hate it. I just hate it so much, watching him slowly push the needle through to stitch up his own face.
And then he took a drink of his drink, and I was like, so he takes the drink, and in my head I was thinking, I mean, if they really wanted to be realistic, that shit would pour out of his. Oh, look, it did pour out of the hole. Oh, look, it did. They did do that. And I find out now that I didn't want that, actually.
I did not need that at all. Also, Chekhov's sleeping potion. I love getting that introduced early, and Ophelia like snatching it, and the doctor sort of kind of noticing but not really noticing that she took it. and then it comes back later, and finally her putting it in his liquor.
She did 1 drop, 2 drops, and then she was like, "What am I doing?" And squeezed that shit.
Squeeze
like,
the rest in. Yep. It was so good. But then again, really smart writing. Now, anything that happens fantastical for the rest of the movie, for the rest of that scene,
Yep.
he's not going to believe any of it,
He's
even
an
if he did survive.
unreliable witness now.
Yeah. Oh, so good. To set that up, much like so many other things, set it up multiple times, pay it off. I loved it. There's so much good about this script.
The foreshadowing and payoff throughout the film for everything was so beautifully done. Like, it's just like everything from the dress. Like, you know that dress is going to get messed up. Because she's like, look, her mother's like, I made this for you. And I would have loved to have had this dress at your age. And like all of the workers around being like, you step back, don't get that dress messy. And like, even to the point where she's like, I'm going to take it off because I'm so convinced it's going to get messy otherwise. And she's not wrong. But like, I've been that kid who has been put in a dress and has been told to keep it nice, and the restriction of that. I did this at my parents' wedding when my mum got married. All the boys were playing soccer out in the garden after the wedding, and I wanted to join in, so I went and got changed into my jeans because I was like, I'll ruin the dress otherwise. So like, I've literally done this, and it always backfires. Like, it never works out, and it's just such a brilliant, like, oh, you know it's coming, but but it is better that she didn't climb into the hole in the tree wearing it.
Right. Which I love the visual of that tree. That tree.
A great tree.
That, for me, ranks right up there with the tree in Sleepy Hollow as this just like, there is no tree that looks like that. No. And yet, we've all seen that tree at the same time. I loved it so much. But then she climbs into there, and that initially or originally the script called for that scene with the frog to be like much more than what it was. But the animatronic they had for the frog couldn't move around the way that they wanted. And so they ended up shrinking it down and having it where she just outsmarts the frog. And then they did a lot with CG. That's another one of those really grotesque scenes, right? Where it's just like turns itself inside out. And then
it deflates.
Yes. It deflates like a balloon, just deflates. Which that was a real practical effect, the deflation. And you can kind of tell, and it's just, it's gross. Yeah. And they also said that the insides of the frog were basically just solid gelatin, and it was too heavy to move, so they had to bring the mold onto set and mix the gelatin on set.
Oh my God.
Because it was just solid, and they couldn't move it that way. But this movie is such a wonderful combination of horrific visuals and amazing fantasy.
Yes.
That balances itself out so well. Yeah. And I think that is the real magic trick of this movie, is the balance between the two. Because the Pale Man, the frog turning inside out, even the fawn at times are grotesque. But they're so much easier to look at than anything dealing with Vidal. And the stuff that he does, whether it's smashing the guy's face in with the bottom of the bottle, which, you know, film has taught us that glass breaks super easy, but it really doesn't.
No.
So when you
Especially
see a scene
if
like
the bottle's full.
Yes. So seeing a scene like that, like, that's rough. That's rough to watch. And Vidal getting his cheek sliced open, and the way everybody's shot in the face and in the cheeks. Why always? I remember coming out of the movie theater, and my friend that was with me, Joe, was like, why was everybody shot in the cheek in this movie? It's just,
I think it's a bigger target. Like, if you're aiming for a face, what are the odds that you're going to hit it like bullseye between the eyes and the forehead? Like movies would have you believe, like you're going to get shot in all manner of places.
It's also something we just hadn't seen. Like, we didn't see a lot of that. So it's so jarring and unsettling. And I think unsettling is the perfect word for so much of this movie. Because it is just like, you're uncomfortable at times watching it, but in a way that you want to watch more, at least for
Yes.
me.
Yeah, it's a lot of like on every level, both with the like with the violence of it, with the gross creatures that are kind of scary, and even with the social encounters and the social dynamics
Mhm.
within the scenes. Like they're hard to watch. It's hard to watch him sat at dinner with his wife, and somebody asks his wife a question about how they met, and you can see immediately that he just doesn't want her to speak.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
and that's gross in a different way.
Yes.
And the way that he speaks to Mercedes, that has a kind of like, I could never quite put my finger on if I thought it was like from a lecherous direction or if he suspected her all along.
Yeah.
I couldn't decide which. I think it might have been both and shifted at a certain point, but it was uncomfortable, the sort of dynamic of it all. The fact that she was always the one going up and delivering the food, and the older women who they had to stay downstairs, and she was in charge of all of them, and they had like hidden away and everything, but none of them had to interact with him. And she had to interact with him all the time, and those interactions were always very uncomfortable because you know where she stands morally and politically in the face of everything that's going on, and she has to serve him, and it's gross.
It really is. And just the fact that she hates that she has had to do that for so long. She tells her brother at one point, I'm such a coward for living next to him and doing all this. And he, Pedro having to tell her, like, no, you're not. Like, what you're doing is important and very courageous.
Yeah.
I just can't say enough good things about this movie. This is...
It's a treasure trove.
It really is. And I'm so glad that you got to see it now. Where does this fit of the Del Toro movies that you have seen? Where does this fit for you?
In terms of like my favorites?
Yeah.
I feel like this sits directly below Hellboy, which is my favorite.
Okay.
And I think that's just because Hellboy also rides that line of being family friendly that much more. And you can tell like with the second one that they really let him go kind of ham with it that much more, as is prevalent by the fairy market, which has been a huge influence for me in some of my storytelling work. And anybody who knows me would probably be able to spot the places where that was an informative thing to have watched coming up. But this sits like maybe even right alongside for that top spot, actually, now I'm thinking about it, because it's just masterfully done, and it's a very real and tragic story that has a lot of weight to it. So it's not just like Hellboy is awesome and super fun, and you watch it and you're like, that was great, but then you carry on with your day. And this is a movie that's sitting and staying with me, because it has so much more to say.
And it's amazing to me, like, he was offered things. So he had done Blade 2 in 2002, Hellboy in 2004. Both of those very well received, did good business. They're both comic book properties. So, of course, he's going to be the hot name in comic books, right? So he was offered things like Fantastic Four or Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or X-Men, The Last Stand. I kind of want to slip into the parallel universe where he directs a Chronicles of Narnia, because
Del Toro Narnia would have slapped. That would have gone so hard.
Just Mr. Tumnus alone is a completely different character at that point.
Yeah.
But I like that he didn't just chase a good payday and doing another big budget kind of action-y thing. And this was a movie, because he started writing this apparently in like 1993. So this was kind of that labor of love he had been working on for a while. And I also read that he was offered better deals for it, but he turned them down because he wanted to make his movie. And if anything, that is the most Del Toro thing I can think of, because you look at some of the other movies that he has made over the years, and things like The Shape of Water, Crimson Peak, he helped write and develop the Hobbit movies, but then he backed away from them because he wasn't going to get to do quite what he wanted to do, and he was going to work on some other projects. Yeah. But Nightmare Alley was a phenomenal remake of an old noir film. And the one thing with Nightmare Alley for me is I kept waiting for that Del Toro like fantasy world to really show up, and it never did. And then at the end of the movie, I was like, oh, but it fit. Because I didn't realize at the time seeing it that it was a remake of an established movie.
I haven't seen it. I'm gonna my list is a mile long, but I'm gonna add it.
It's a good one, and also like his Frankenstein from last year was phenomenal. That's really
another
enjoyed
one
that.
It's been on my list. That one.
But definitely, like the next one you should watch after seeing this, you should watch Devil's Backbone, because if you like this, you're gonna like Devil's Backbone. Sweet. And I think prior to seeing this movie in the theater, that was my favorite Del Toro. I loved Blade 2, absolutely. I loved Hellboy, but there was something about Devil's Backbone that felt like it was just something, there was more passion behind it. Mm-hmm. And then I saw this and I'm like, oh, this was everything he learned making Devil's Backbone distilled and made better. Yeah. And for me, this is still my favorite Del Toro film, is Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, I think the more it sits, it's likely to take that top spot for me. And just like every single second of it was so intentional, and you could tell that it was a passion project, that it was for the love of it and the story that he wanted to tell. I'm glad he didn't take any shortcuts or too much influence from others, because it was phenomenal.
Absolutely. No, he did well. He was well served to make his movie, and I think that allowed for things like Crimson Peak, Shape of Water, Nightmare Alley to be the movies. He feels like a very intentional director, like that wants to make his story, and he's so enamored with storytelling. It's why I love listening to like interviews with him, because it's just so much fun to hear him talk about making movies and the things that, because he's so passionate about what he loves. That's what I loved about his Criterion Closet movie, was he was just giddy. Like he would pick something off the shelf and just glow about it. And then you couple that with just the dark nature of things that he does. Because apparently The Fawn was based off of a lucid dream he had, where he would have a recurring lucid dream of a fawn like walking out from behind something in his room.
Yeah, like I must admit, when the creature, the fawn, appeared, and then Ophelia's like, "Who are you? What are you?" And he's like, "I'm a fawn," and I was like imagining Mr. Tumnus like popping out from behind the lamppost, and I was like, these are different things.
Also, I will never, ever, ever be tired of the "I have so many names" type trope, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Oh, I have names. Oh, my name. I have old names that only the trees can pronounce. I'm a sucker for that. Like immediately, I'm just like, yes, give me more. Put it in my veins.
Yeah. Something that is a trope that gives you so much information about the age of this creature, as if the entire presentation of him isn't making that clear on its own.
Plus, like you can smell that creature, right? And it smells like stone and earth and moss. And I love that idea of just this old nature like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you got to watch this movie and that you enjoyed it. That you just, because I love this movie so much, so that makes me super happy. Now, what I want to know is, what have you got going on that you want to let people know about? What are you working on? Because I know something that you're working on.
I want to let people know about my new podcast, Young Vale, which, speaking of kids discovering magic and things, is what that's all about. It is the story of 3 ordinary high schoolers who discover that there's maybe some magical, amazing things going on in their otherwise completely ordinary town. And it's what they kind of get up to when they come clashing head to head with that reality and how it changes their worlds, navigating high school drama and homework and wild magic. It's a real laugh. You can listen to it on all of the usual podcatchers and things, or go to youngvale.com. And it stars other people who I believe, I don't know if all three of them have been on this show, but I know that Alex has and Swan has. Have you had KCD on?
I have not, but on the list to get on. So gonna happen.
Perfect. So they are the three stars of that show, and it's up to 4 episodes so far. They're about an hour long each. It happens weekly. It's just audio only, so really easy to like listen to in the car or in the background of doing other things. We had a hell of a time recording season 1. It's super fun, and I'm laboring over the sound edits because I'm really enjoying and speaking of sound editing, I'm really enjoying going to town on that. So that's another fun part of it being audio only, is creating a whole world just with a soundscape.
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, that's kind of like my main thing that I want to shout out right now is Young Vale. And if you want to see any of the other stuff that I do make comics and tell other stories and things. Iddstar.com is where to find all of that stuff.
Excellent. Check out Young Vale for sure, and iddstar.com. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's been super fun.
I do this show weekly, every Sunday night at twitch.tv/TV's Travis. So you can come hang out 8 p.m. Eastern time and catch the show live. If you can't make it live, that's fine. The show comes out every Wednesday, everywhere you get podcasts. If you want it a few days early, become a patron. Patreon.com/WIHS gets you the show a few days earlier, and it gets you access to special spots on my Discord server, as well as helping me maybe determine movies to watch or talk about or find guests, as well as my first watch diaries, where I watch something myself for the first time, like Fallout, and then talk about it. And I do promise I'm going to be doing more of those. I also want to give a shout out real quick to friends of the show. JF Dubow and Amy Frost have their book based on their podcast, Aquillow, coming out soon. A Dash of Demon, Aquillow Book 1, will be available on June 16th of this year. If you haven't already ordered a copy of it, I highly recommend it. It's great. And the show is wonderful as well, aquillow.com. I love those two. They're two of my favorite human beings. So check that out if you like horror and cozy horror, for sure. And definitely check out Young Vale, because everybody involved in that are amazing people. So excellent. Well, Vic, thank you so much for being here. We'll have to do this again. We'll have to find another movie,
anytime.
Maybe something you have seen, and we'll make me watch it. Who knows? Those are definitely out there. But yeah, we'll definitely have you back sometime. But until next time. Now, next week, I am going in a different direction. I'm going to watch Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. Just came out a couple of years ago, but my friend Miles, I mentioned that I had not seen that, and he was like, well, I guess you're going to watch it now. And it is one of the most accessible movies Miles has had me want to watch. So we had to jump on it for sure, because he likes the obscure stuff. So that's what's coming up next week as we roll toward closer and closer to the live episode of another Del Toro film. I'm going to be talking about Hellboy at Nerdtacular 2026 this year. Nice. So if you're going to be in Salt Lake City and you're going to be at Nerdtacular, you'll get to hear me gush about Del Toro some more, because I also quite love Hellboy. And my friend Joe Hood has never seen it before, so I'm making him watch it. I know. Fantastic. When he was like, I haven't seen Hellboy, I said, sold. We're done. We already know.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
That's that sword.
Exactly. So until next time, just remember to enjoy your movies, everybody, regardless of how weird and out there they are. And let's be excellent to each other. This has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
Cuentan que hace mucho, mucho tiempo.
I had absolutely no idea what to use for an outro stinger.